The origins of Banzai Charges. The Samurai Code and Bushido. The Banzai Charge, a desperate and often suicidal tactic, has its roots deep in Japanese history. The Samurai Code, known as Bushido, emphasized honor, loyalty, and self-sacrifice. This warrior code, passed down from generation to generation, shaped the mindset of Japanese soldiers during World War II. Pre-World War II military doctrine. As Japan modernized its military in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the principles of Bushido were integrated into military doctrine. The idea of ultimate sacrifice for emperor and nation became central, setting the stage for the Banzai Charges of World War II. The early war and the first Banzai Charges. Invasion of China and the Marco Polo Bridge incident. The invasion of China in 1937 saw some of the earliest instances of Japanese forces using suicide tactics. The Marco Polo Bridge incident marked the beginning of the Second Sino-Japanese War, where Japanese soldiers launched fierce, often suicidal, charges to overwhelm Chinese defenses. The Pacific Theater and Banzai tactics. As Japan expanded its empire into the Pacific, Banzai charges became a more frequent tactic. In battles across the Pacific Islands, Japanese soldiers would launch these desperate attacks, often in the face of overwhelming odds, hoping to break enemy lines or die with honor. The psychological warfare of Banzai charges. The impact on Allied forces. Banzai charges were not just military maneuvers, but also a form of psychological warfare. The sight of hundreds of soldiers charging fearlessly, often screaming their battle cries, was intended to instill terror and confusion in Allied forces. The cultural disconnect. The concept of Banzai charges was deeply rooted in Japanese culture, but to Allied forces, it was an incomprehensible and terrifying tactic. This cultural disconnect often led to misunderstandings and miscalculations on the battlefield. The Battle of Saipan and the largest Banzai charge. The situation in Saipan. The Battle of Saipan in 1944 was one of the bloodiest confrontations in the Pacific War. As the situation became increasingly desperate for the Japanese forces, they decided to launch the largest Banzai charge of the war. The execution of the charge. On July 7, 1944, over 3,000 Japanese soldiers, including the wounded, launched a Banzai charge against the American lines. It was a desperate attempt to break the American advance, but the charge was ultimately repelled with devastating losses. The aftermath and impact on the war. The toll on Japanese forces. The massive losses suffered in Banzai charges, particularly at Saipan, significantly weakened Japanese forces. The tactic, while heroic in the eyes of the Japanese, was ultimately futile and led to devastating casualties. The change in Allied tactics. After experiencing multiple Banzai charges, Allied forces adapted their tactics to better defend against such assaults. The once shocking tactic became a predictable and deadly mistake for the Japanese. The decline of Banzai charges. Shifting strategies in the Japanese military. As the war dragged on and Japanese resources dwindled, the military began to shift away from large-scale Banzai charges. The tactic was seen as increasingly ineffective, and more emphasis was placed on defensive strategies and guerrilla warfare. The final charges. Despite the shift in strategy, Banzai charges continued to be used in desperate situations. The final years of the war saw fewer, but still devastating charges, as Japanese forces fought to the last man on islands across the Pacific. The legacy of Banzai charges. Remembering the sacrifice. In Japan, the Banzai charges are remembered as acts of supreme sacrifice. Monuments and memorials honor those who gave their lives in these desperate charges, reflecting on the courage and tragedy of these actions. The global perspective. Globally, Banzai charges are often viewed as a symbol of the fanaticism and tragedy of war. They serve as a reminder of the horrors of World War II and the extreme measures that were taken by both sides. The end of an era. The fall of the Japanese Empire. The eventual defeat of Japan in 1945 marked the end of an era of Banzai charges and the samurai spirit in modern warfare. The use of such tactics became a thing of the past as Japan rebuilt itself in the post-war world. Lessons learned. The story of Banzai charges offers valuable lessons about the impact of culture on military tactics and the devastating cost of war. It serves as a stark reminder of the lengths to which nations will go in the pursuit of victory.